What's up, guys? We got another one. We're back with the Renaissance channel. These guys are awesome. This is supposed to be what they're calling the Mission Impossible, some super cool mission the Ukrainians went on deep behind enemy lines. So I want to check this out. First off, my name is Saxon. I went by Vegas in the International Legion. I joined the Legion at the beginning of 2023. I am still in Ukraine. I'm no longer in the Legion. Before I was in the Legion, I was a firefighter and an EMT outside of Fort Worth, Texas. I had no military experience prior to joining the Ukrainian Armed Forces. I did deploy to the front line and spent some time out there. So let's watch this Ukrainian Mission Impossible. I'm excited about this one.
Such operations have never happened in history. Mission Impossible, Ukrainian version. Of course, it was a secret that no one knew about at all. Unique details of a historic special operation. The chances of returning were slim. How the GUR, in tandem with the Army Aviation, did the impossible. Testimonies of the direct
The GUR, G-U-R, is Ukrainian Special Forces. I know multiple guys who are currently in GUR right now that I knew in the Legion. And they spent some time in the Legion. They met some guys in the GUR teams and then moved over there. I actually recently just was talking to somebody over email who's heading to a GUR team right now. They're like the high-speed guys.
Participants of the operation. We flew over the heads of the Russians. When they flew over there, we could even see their faces. How and why they survived, where others do not. It's like a lifelong flight, and 1 second long. In this episode, you will find out all the details and chronology of the very first flight to Azovstal.
Azovstal.
I did not believe until the last moment, even when I heard the sound of
So this was right when the war started, it looks like.
Helicopters approaching. I thought it was the enemy's helicopters. I did not believe it was ours. There was no protocol for the exact actions. At the time, as this was a unique operation and the first such flight, fate brought them together at the most dangerous moment of their lives. Two brave fighters, a deputy commander of an NGU brigade nicknamed Molfar, and a GUR Special Forces officer with the call sign Flint, were flying in the same helicopter from the besieged Azovstal. The door opens and an iron box is thrown out, which falls right next to me, near my head, and someone says, "Whoa, wait, we'll take it away." The engines were still running, and the pilots were in their seats. We unloaded very quickly. We were definitely in radio silence mode, and were obliged to go on the air only in case of a critical situation. When we were flying, it was top speed at low altitude, just like a roller coaster. We were all defending the city of Mariupol. We will fight to the last drop of blood.
Holy shit.
At that time, Mariupol was already completely surrounded. The Russian Army Aviation and naval artillery were simply destroying the city. When you drive around the city and see the corpses of children and women, when they are just lying on the street and no one cleans them up, because there is no one to clean them up. When you see with your own eyes how parents stand by the bodies of their children, then, of course, it is very difficult to contain your emotions. The last outpost of the defenders is the Iron Heart of Mariupol, Azovstal. The hospital on the surface was destroyed by airstrikes, and the wounded were transferred to the plant's bunker, the so-called Iron Works. The occupiers are on the outskirts of Kyiv. Azovstal is holding on with its last strength, but it is fulfilling a crucial mission, drawing enemy forces away from other areas. At that time, the GUR headquarters began to develop an unprecedented special operation. The task of the scouts is to deliver much-needed anti-tank weapons, communications equipment, and medicines to the surrounded soldiers. But there is very little time, and how to get there. There is 100 kilometers of invaded land. The Sea of Azov is blocked. The high-altitude air target will be immediately detected by Russian radars, and the aircraft will not be able to land there. Meanwhile, the number of wounded is growing every day. Therefore, in fact, the most advantageous step is a helicopter. This is a very difficult task. First of all, it is a flight over enemy territory to great depths. This is not a tactical landing.
These are old, dude. These are like Cold War era. Am I mistaken? Or I've seen multiple of these out when I was on the front line.
20 kilometers away, where you can suppress everything with artillery. This is 100 kilometers when you are completely autonomous. You are not covered by aircraft. The only thing that covers you is either the night or the fact that you are at ultra low altitude of 5 to 10 meters.
5 to 10 meters. Holy shit.
While the scouts are studying the map of occupied Mariupol, millimeter by millimeter, its defenders receive information that they are supposed to receive something from the big land by helicopter. Molfar is to receive Starlinks, and his brother-in-arms, Gogol, anti-tank weapons. I waited with my friend for about 3 hours for them.
We had Starlink on the front line too. Literally a lifesaver. Lifesaver. Very cool to have. You know, it wasn't perfect, but in an area where there's absolutely nothing, you're in a village with, you know, no running water, no bathrooms, no, you know, TVs, radio, nothing. The Starlink was a lifesaver.
We made a kind of conditional runway on the territory of the plant. He was really looking forward to it. But the soldiers' hopes were shattered after the message. We were told, that's it, there will be no helicopters. Stand down, we're working on. The first time I received this assignment, it was in early March. It was not a planned operation. In general, it was very different from the flight I flew the next time, when we made a successful flight to Mariupol and returned back. We were given a task and told that we had to deliver cargo, ammunition, communication systems, internet systems, and medicines. The task was even set as follows. You fly there, unload all this stuff, and then make a decision whether to stay there or go back by helicopter. But there was also this phrase, well, I wouldn't fly back. This attempt was unsuccessful. We flew to the front line, literally 10 kilometers away, and came under fire. We had another 90 to 100 kilometers to fly, and the enemy already knew we were coming. They were shooting at us, so we had to turn back. But even then, there was a critical need for communications equipment and anti-tank weapons. This was the most critical need for us. The cruciality of the situation is well understood at the headquarters. For the 10th time, for the 100th time, the best specialists are laying another route to sneak into the besieged Azovstal. It was necessary to lay a route that would go around many districts. These villages on the way, larger and smaller villages, had to be passed over a long distance. Every next step on the electronic map is checked directly behind enemy lines. Special forces, drones, and satellite reconnaissance were working, says Flynn, who then volunteered to fly to the besieged plant. Satellite imagery and drone flights allow us to understand their location in a live, here and now format. And a route was established based on this. At first, the groups on foot went through. On part of the route where it was risky for the foot groups to walk, drones were launched and diligently investigated whether there were any Russian air defense systems. His officer in the main intelligence decredit, with the call sign Flint, said that he learned the details of this top-secret operation a few hours before it began from his immediate supervisor, Karolo Budanov. The most important criterion for participation was the fighters' willingness to participate in this operation. When asked by the commander if he needed time to think, Flint immediately replied, no. So 2 helicopters are flying to Azovstal, one of them carrying Flint and the other 2 special forces in civilian clothes. The first task is to evacuate the pilots to a safe area if the helicopter is shot down by the enemy, and to take up the defense and wait for the evacuation flight if they are hard injured. Well, sure, if we survive the fall. The second task is to provide psychological support to the crew. The presence of GUR, special forces on board, served as an emotional support for the pilots, which meant that we absolutely shared the same fate and consequences. After that failed attempt, the Army Aviation Command took a different approach to this issue. The main intelligence decorative of the Ministry of Defense joined the mission. They developed the routes, and there was already very serious information, satellite images, and everything else. Given this data, they jointly developed a route depending on the number of Russian troops and their locations. In intelligence, the very thing that is most impossible tends to succeed.
I know I'm not commenting a bunch, right? But this is just super interesting, and I know nothing about, helicopters and this sort of an operation, so I'm just kind of soaking it in right now.
Why is that? Because if it seems impossible to us, it seems even more impossible to the enemy. It was very important for our guys who do not give up and hold the defense there. A severely wounded Molfar is brought to the hospital in the Azovstal bunker. At some point, suddenly, there is complete silence. I heard this silence. The commander, Redis, came. He talked to the guys there. Then he came to me and personally told me that there would be an evacuation, most likely tomorrow morning. Molfar agrees, because it is impossible to get back into service quickly with such an injury. The first evacuation from Azovstal is scheduled for 6 a.m. on March 21. When they told me about it, I thought, okay, but I was sure that they simply wouldn't reach us.
Game time.
March 21, Dnipro City. 2 Mi-8 helicopters, 2 navigators, 2 crew chiefs, all of them volunteers. This mission seemed absolutely crazy and impossible. The helicopters are heading northeast, then across the contact line, to avoid being detected by Russian radar.
It's so crazy to see a helicopter fly that low,
The helicopters must not rise above 10 meters. There is no room for error, absolutely no. A little bit off the steering wheel, a wrong handle off the wheel, and you're already in the ground. They fly so low that they see the faces of the Russians in the trenches. We flew over the heads of the Russians when we went over there. We could even see their faces. We clearly see the APC that was in the trench. The Mi-8 is not an attack helicopter, so it is only armed with an onboard machine gun and standard missile weapons. You know that you are very vulnerable. You have no armor. There are only protective shields in the bow from the time of Afghanistan and some weapons. In the cargo cockpit of the Mi-8, the special forces go over the details of the mission over and over again in their heads and monitor the situation through the windows. At moments like this, time changes its course, Flint says. In such a situation, in a situation of heightened emotional tension, time flows differently. 6:40 a.m., the first evacuation flight arrives at Azovstal. Only a few people at Azovstal know about the arrival of the cargo and the evacuation, an operation that is as bold as it is secret. Of course, it was a secret that no one knew about at all. A very limited number of people knew that there would be an evacuation. While the guys were waiting for it, the occupiers' aviation continues to raise Azovstal to the ground. While we were waiting, the enemy made 3 air raids on the plant's territory, and there were several artillery attacks on the plant itself. Molfar admits that until the last moment, it did not believe that such a rescue operation was possible. Even when I heard the sounds of helicopters approaching, I thought they were enemy helicopters. It was only when the helicopters landed and started unloading property that I believed they were ours. Finally, Azovstal's communication chief sees the Starlings he's been dreaming of for so long. They were taking away these first boxes. Everyone was in a hurry, but I managed to see that it was a Starling, and I thought, oh, this is great. Now the guys will definitely have a good connection. I was very happy. And so, 8 wounded on board. It took less than 20 minutes to unload and load.
Wow.
We unloaded the cargo very quickly and loaded the wounded guys. That is, altogether it took 15 to 20 minutes. The engines were not shut down. The pilots were in their seats.
That's
The
crazy.
helicopters take a different route back to Dnipro, as the Russians might have guessed the Ukrainians' daring breakthrough. So the next point for refueling is the airport in Zaporizhzhia. It is clear that this is still a dangerous route. The chances of returning were slim. The Russian rear was more than 100 kilometers deep, teeming with enemy aircraft, anti-aircraft missile systems, and possible ambushes. The stretcher with Molfar is placed on an additional fuel tank, in the same place where the Flint Special Forces officer sat and went over the details of the operation on the way to Azovstal. I was holding the stretcher with Molfar at the time, because it was very movable. I held on to the top partition and held the stretcher so that it would not move or fall. There was enough work for everyone. All that Molfar remembers. That it was very cold on board Mi-8, and the flight itself was like a roller coaster. People with severe injuries are completely undressed and wrapped in a thermal blanket. You just lie there naked. Well, it was still very cold. It was the maximum speed at low altitude, just like a roller coaster. Time changes its structure. You have completely different feelings. You don't understand exactly where you are and what is happening. Finally, landing in Zaporizhzhia. It was a field. Gasoline trucks moved to a certain point. Our helicopters landed, and technicians quickly connected hoses for refueling. That's when it felt like we were already home, and we had almost completed the mission. But the evacuated Molfar did not believe they'd been saved till he saw the sun at the airfield in Dnipro. I remember those feelings very well, because we were unloaded from the helicopter. It was already morning and the sun was shining, and it was an incredible feeling when you saw the sun for the first time in a week. That was the first flight to Azovstal. Bold, risky, but successful.
Man, imagine being stuck in that factory for a week. It's dirty, dusty, smoky. You're taking enemy fire. It's dark. You don't see the sun for a week. Shit.
A mission that seemed impossible laid the groundwork for others.
Lviv.
There were anti-tank weapons. What is he carrying? Some kind of disposable grenade launchers. Maybe an AT-4. In-law? No, the in-law is bigger. This looks more like an AT-4 or something like that. Almost 2 years later, we showed Molfar videos of other successful raids on Azovstal. The soldiers are unloading the anti-tank weapons that Molfar's comrade, Gogol, had dreamed of receiving. Hero of Ukraine, posthumous. He was a deputy brigade commander and ran around with a regular RPG. He was surprised. How was this possible? When other areas already have javelins and in-laws, we only have RPGs and Molotov cocktails as anti-tank weapons. It's just out of order. A total of 7 flights were made to Azovstal as part of the air raid, involving 16 helicopters. With each successive daring flight, the operation became more and more risky. 2 helicopters were shot down during the 5th and 7th flights, and another was hit while flying to help down crews. Such a mission could have been planned and carried out, well, several times. We carried it out not once, not twice, not 3 or 4 times. That's while the Russians were slowly closing these holes. And just on my flight, it happened that we were ambushed on the way back. On the way back, we walked along the sea above the water. After that, we went up to the land where there's a big difference. About 50 meters between the sea and the land. And after literally 500 meters, maybe a kilometer, I heard the Russians shooting. Then I heard an explosion on the left side. Realized that the helicopter was going down, falling, losing the main rotor speed. Accordingly, this happens when one of the engines is lost. I realized that we were probably on fire. We were hit, and we had a lot of fuel. The helicopter burns up in just a few seconds in the air. I realized I had to make a decision. The height was 5 meters, maybe 3 meters. There was no place to go down, no place to land in front of you, especially while you were being shot at. I realized that we had 20 wounded on board. We would just be shot on the spot. The second helicopter did not respond. I continued maneuvering and tried not to fall. It's quite a rare case, to put it bluntly. Landing a helicopter on a single engine is difficult in itself. But here, it was also a low-altitude landing. You see, if it happened at an altitude of more than 500 meters, you could have landed on auto-rotation, rearranged the propeller pitch, and then there would have been a smooth landing, roughly like a glider, like an airplane with the engines off. At low altitudes, this will not help you. The helicopter was falling beyond critical indicators, but at this critical mode of operation, in which I knew that the helicopter would fall, it continued to fly. I don't know by what miracle, but in this critical mode, we flew and reached the landing point.
It's a sick shot.
Luck is an important element, but luck will only accompany you if you have prepared everything else yourself. You cannot assign a beginner to such a flight. It has to be a very experienced pilot who feels the helicopter. Excuse me, I'll say it directly. Feels it with his ass. Feels the machine as a living being. As a cavalryman once felt a horse. As a result, 64 wounded were evacuated, 72 reinforcement soldiers were airborne, and 30 tons of cargo were delivered to Azovstal. But how did the occupiers miss this gap in their own defense? First, the GUR operation was carefully planned. Second, it was the incredible courage of the helicopter pilots. My utmost respect to the Army Aviation. The guys who did this were incredible. It was a very big feat. And the third factor is the Soviet legacy of the Rus Army. Each commander of a direction was afraid to admit to his superior leadership that Ukrainian helicopters were flying into his controlled zone as if to their homes, unloading ammunition, loading wounded, and flying away with impunity. The importance of this operation cannot be overstated.
So the Russian commanders did not want to admit that this was happening, so the Ukrainians were able to get away with it multiple times because they weren't taking the precautions to stop the evacs.
The connection of the besieged Azovstal with the big land was not only material. It also gave the defenders confidence that they were not abandoned, that Ukraine exists, that Kyiv was not captured. Thanks to Starlinks, the whole world learned about the heroism and defenders of Mariupol and the hell that the Russians had created there. If they had not been brought, there would have been much less information, and we could have been cut off from the outside world at any time, and no one would have known what was happening there. Volunteers and weapons from the big land helped to curb the activity that the enemy would have shown in other parts of the front, meaning that without the Azovstal fortress, it is unknown how far the Russians could have advanced in the first month of the war. Friends, Please subscribe to our second backup.
That was badass. That was definitely a different kind of video than we usually react to. There wasn't much reacting there except for just awe and surprise, because this is just way different than what we usually do. A couple things that I thought of during this is these pilots have got to be some of the best pilots in the world, considering, you know, there's pilots like American pilots who are just trained to a T and they're just incredible at what they do. But you've got pilots like this that are forged in fire, if you will, right? They're battle tested. Everything that they're learning and adapting to is real life combat. So they're learning in the field every day, or, you know, whenever they go on mission. I bet there's a lot of militaries that could learn a lot from these pilots right here. And that goes for any part of the armed forces that's seeing conflict or on a daily has to deal with real life combat. It kind of reminds me of Israel. You know, Israel has one of the best militaries in the world. One of the reasons being is because they've been fighting on all sides of their land for decades. They've got tried and true tested strategies and techniques that have worked in that field, in the battlefield. I don't know. Very cool. This was cool. Let me know if you like this kind of content. I do want to check out some more. I'm going to look up some GUR footage, the Ukrainian Special Forces, see if we can find anything on GUR. I know usually it's kept pretty secretive, you know, but if it's a few months after the operation, I'm hoping they release some footage. Please like, subscribe, share, do all that stuff, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Love you. Stay safe.